Elisa, thank you so much for joining us here at the Polyglot Conference Global this year. I am absolutely honoured to have you with us. It's been so many years that we've been meeting up at different events around the world, and I can honestly say that you're one of the most fun, positive people that I've had the pleasure of meeting at these events. You always make me smile. You always make me feel happy. You always make me feel valued. You are an incredible language learner and teacher. And so it just made absolute sense to have you come and talk and share your experience and your knowledge with us all here today, because I think we can all benefit, me included, from what you've got to say. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you and with the audience, really. As you know, I'm always very happy to see you, and in general, as I'm fond of languages and super happy to be part in these events.
Well, without further ado, I think one of the things that strikes me about you is you have this methodology of language learning, multiple languages at the same time. Now, this is a question I get asked quite a lot, and a number of people ask it all over the internet to various people, but it's something that you particularly specialize in. Tell us a little bit about what it means to you to be studying lots of languages at the same time, and how that works. How do you actually get that to happen?
The reason why I started, and I didn't even think about this being a method, it was really just because of my passion, my language passion. Because I always thought, okay, you know, I met so many people who want to study maybe Italian, maybe Japanese, and they say, yeah, but I want to study that other language because I have to, because it's more useful. But I always think that when you don't like something, it's very hard to get yourself motivated over a long period of time. So what I always say is that, okay, if you really think you need that other language for your future, why not? But if you add something that you really like, you might even be more motivated, because you know that you are not just studying one language and maybe in 2, 3, 5 years you will be studying the language that you really wanted to study from the beginning. So this is how I started studying multiple languages at the same time. I was living in Germany, and I was improving my German. I could already speak English and I could already speak French. And then I met very nice people from Latin America and from other parts of the world. I met Russian people, people from many other countries, and I started some language exchanges, even though I didn't speak the language. So I started studying the language on my own in order to be able to use it during my language exchanges. And it worked fabulously. It was really nice and was very motivating, because I was talking to people. Of course, I wouldn't be able to say everything I wanted, but it was still motivating enough. I was very happy about that. And after a while, I decided that how can I maintain my languages? I've studied more than 25 languages. I cannot dedicate 1 hour to each language every day, and 1 hour is more or less the maximum I can dedicate to all my languages altogether. So what I decided to do is that, okay, if I already speak French to a C2 level, then there is no need to study French for 2 hours, for 1 hour. I can also study it even for just 5 minutes. I just need to refresh it, to maintain it. So what I do is that I dedicate, of course, more time to languages I still need to improve, and there is always room for improvement. But I mean, languages I really need to improve. And other languages that I want to maintain, I want to learn some more expression and so on. So and I don't study like 20 languages every day. What I do is like life is changing. I don't like a schedule that is always the same every day of my life for 80 years. So this is why what I do is I decide what languages I want to improve in that period of time, because as you know, and as probably many people know, the higher the level, the least you need to practice it. So the slower you will lose it if you don't practice it. So it's better to practice languages that you don't speak very well in order to not to lose them, because you lose them much more easily. So what I do is I study a bit every day. In some periods of my life, I study maybe 3 languages at the same time. At some point, I study 13 languages at the same time. But it really depends because what you want to focus on. There is not like one show that fits all. The important part is that you do something that you enjoy, that is useful to you, and not just because you want. Yeah, so motivation is the first thing, and then what I do is I study maybe a language for 2 3 minutes, another one for example, for Catalan, since I don't get to use it very often. What I do, I have the book open in the other room, and either before going to sleep or when I pass by, the book is open. What I want to study is there, and I write 2 3 words when I pass by. So it's not really like super, it's not very much, but good enough because I think 8 years ago I did the certificate C1 for Catalan. So, but I don't speak it too much. So in order to revise and not to forget vocabulary. So.
Yeah, I just love the way you said very casually, I don't, I don't do much. I just like pass by a book and write down 3 words. But last year I did a C1 exam.
No,
It's
not last year. I think almost 10 years ago.
Oh,
Almost
10
10
years
years
ago.
ago.
Okay, I did a
Mm-hmm.
C1 exam. And there'll be people listening to that thinking, well, okay, you didn't reach C1 to pass a C1 exam in Catalan. Even if you're an Italian speaker, you must have done a lot of Catalan at some point in the past.
Of course, I always study formal languages. People who say, "Ah, lucky you," I think I wish. I'm not the kind of person who doesn't need to study language in order to know it. I met maybe 2 3 people in my life who learn 1 word, 10 words, and the next day, the following month, they still know the word. I'm not that kind of person, so I have to study, but I try to make studying for myself or for my students very enjoyable. Otherwise, otherwise I will find myself with an excuse not to study. So I need to find nice material or a nice way to use it, and
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It has to be interesting. There has to be something there for you to really get into the language itself, some hook or something of interest in there for you. I mean, hearing you saying, studying over 25 languages and which ones you use, one of the questions I think we get in the community, or even outside the community, asking, how is it possible to study that many languages? And some people say, well, wouldn't you prefer to focus on a few languages? What do you ever answer to that when you get that
it's a
question? When you
question
see that?
I've been asked all the time, and my answer is for sure. If I know that I have an exam, a language exam, like in 1 month, of course I'm going to study only that language. There is no point in wasting time with other things. But if, for example, I've already studied some languages and I want to study new ones, if I never practiced the previous ones, I will forget them. So what was the point of studying them? So the reason why I don't like studying language and forget completely about it. I still want to be able to talk or be able to understand. It depends on what language it was and where I'm living. But so as far as so how to point it, I slightly forgot the question. So the question was how to wouldn't it be better to focus on one language and then the others? Yes and no, because for example, even if I love playing squash, badminton, I wouldn't be able, or I wouldn't enjoy the first hour. You would see me very happy playing squash. Then the second hour, maybe I would already be bored. So this is why I don't need to study one language for 20 hours in a row. There are moments where I really enjoy, and I know that there is a reason why I'm doing that. Maybe when I lived in Russia, when I moved there, I knew almost nothing, only the alphabet and maybe 3 4 words. So when I went there, of course, the first months I studied like crazy because I want to be able. Since the first months I only spoke Russian in Russia without. And I never used any other language, despite the fact that my Russian was non-existent. So also because I was obliged, even at the university, because I went there to study, Even in the university, people would talk to me in Russian, even though I was there to start my course. Okay. Anyway, to go back to your initial question. So it's good to start one thing and to take it to the point you want to take it. And I always do that. I never start something and then leave it. But there are periods of my life when I can concentrate more on that or less. So I really think it just depends on your priorities. If you are just moved to a country, you want to be able to speak the language, of course you can focus more on the language you're learning now. But if you don't want to forget the previous ones, I always say, even if you just listen to 2-3 minutes, 5-minute podcasts in the language you have already studied for a while, it's also okay. So focus on one language and then the others, you still have to maintain the previous ones. It's not that you don't have to. And the second reason is that if you are interested in similar languages, you would learn them much more quickly if you learn them at the same time, because the grammar is much. Once you know a language very well, you don't even have to think about grammar. So I'm talking to you, but it's not that I'm thinking, okay, shall I use future? Shall I use a past perfect or something like that? Of course, you speak in an automatic way. And that means that if I weren't a teacher, maybe I wouldn't be able to remember the grammar rules. When I started teaching Italian, I remember I had to study much more to teach Italian than other languages, because I had no idea. I just knew what was correct. And that means that when you study, let's say you want to study French and then you want to study Italian and then Spanish. If you study French and then after some years you study the other two, you have to go back to the same grammar. French and Italian have a very similar grammar, especially for past tenses where the auxiliary verb is identical, like to be or to have. French and Italian, there are maybe 10, 15 verbs you have to remember. So why to go through the verb list and start, okay, what was that? Was it with the verb to be or with the verb to have? If you compare them, if you study at them at the same time, you will only learn the differences. So you will spare yourself lots of work.
Does this work then just for languages from the same family, like with Catalan and Italian and Spanish and French? Or can you do this as well? Would you see these benefits if you're doing it with languages that are not so closely related?
Of course, the advantages are less obvious for languages that don't share the same vocabulary or the same grammar. But first of all, there are similarities even in languages I wouldn't ever imagine. So I don't know. I find the Greek words in Russian and vice versa. Or I find, or even if it's just a word that is not, when I studied a bit of Japanese, even if I find a word that is not actually, let's say, an Italian, a Spanish, a French word, but it reminds me of that, it still helps me because I still have to remember so much vocabulary. So if I can find some words that kind of remind me of that, or when I study, after studying grammar of so many languages, now when when I read about grammar, or when someone tells me about a language feature or a grammar point of a language of a different family, I understand it pretty quickly, just because I'm used to it. So it's really not. I still think it's helpful, and you are still using the same part of the brain. And my favorite is to study a couple of languages, 2, 3, 4, depends on what you want, that belong to the same family, and they don't have to be Romance languages; they can be Asian languages. And then you study at least one language that is completely different, and your brain will thank you for that, because can you imagine studying only French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Catalan? So it's very hard just to study all of them together and never have a break. And when you study a different language, you will never you never think the word is Spanish when it's Arabic. Okay, something like that. But so it's still quite useful. But everything starts where your heart wants to take you. If you have no interest in 5 languages, you don't have to study 5 languages. Only if it's what you want to do, you don't need to wait, because who knows I don't know, maybe you want to move to Macedonia, you need 3-4 languages, then you don't want to study a language for 3 years and then 2 more years and then 2 more years. So otherwise, maybe your motivation to go to Macedonia would be already gone by the time you learn all these languages.
Absolutely. No, I mean, hearing you say that about the language similarities and you know, which words you might mix up, if you do choose to study, like, so let's take Italian, Spanish, French, Catalan. Let's say somebody was to start them. If they started them at the same time, would it get confusing?
No, it depends. I always say it depends on it depends if you do it with guidance, without guidance. And not because you cannot do it without guidance, you can, but then you have to have your own method in order not to mix them up. Otherwise, you rely on someone who knows how to do it. And then for example, in my case, I never had a student who mixed languages for more than, not language like completely, but a couple of words for more than 2-3 sessions. Because I wrote a book about how to learn multiple languages at the same time. And I talk about language features, which doesn't really, is a term that doesn't really exist in the grammar books. Is what I call what you should know in order to learn multiple languages at the same time. So if you know that, so me as a teacher, I would teach how to recognize what are the recurrent patterns, the recurrent endings, the recurrent things that you have to know in order not to mix them up. And once you know that, I don't know, Portuguese and with many words, not all of them, and with so you will know that there is no other language, Romance language, that end in that way. So you know that when you see this word, or when this word comes to your mind, you know that you cannot mix it up with another language, and you start focusing on words that are just completely different. For example, the word also in all these languages is completely different. So you must remember it and practice it a bit. Otherwise, of course, while speaking Italian, you might say también, which is Spanish. But if you practice it a bit, and when I talk to my students, I notice what their recurrent mistakes are, and you insist, you try to practice that more than other things that are not a problem. And the same, you can do it by yourself, but just it depends. If you are someone who has already studied some languages and want to apply the same method you have already used, you can do it. If you never studied a language apart from school, at school, maybe it's better to get some help. Otherwise, you think it's not possible, or you're frustrated. But it's really up to you. There is no one way to do things. There is only your own way, as long as it works. No.
Absolutely, I'm 100% behind you with it's all very individual, and how individuals manage things, and with guidance, a lot more is possible, I think, than without. And yeah, I mean, I've been running my own language learning therapy sessions for exactly this reason for the last year, and I definitely see that. So I can understand where you're coming from completely. I am interested to know, and I hope that there are other people out there thinking this question. I hope he asks it, and I want to ask it. What's the most amount of languages you've ever had a student take on without it really being too crazy for them?
Actually, I had many group classes where people would learn 6 languages at the same time, and they were not even polyglots. There were people who had maybe one of these languages at school. That's it. So that was in Germany, in the language schools in Germany, and then yes, otherwise very common for me must also be in 3 and 4 languages at the same time. And of course, I also taught 10 languages at the same time. For who know me, I started some talks at Polyglot Gathering, for example, explaining how I taught classes where I would teach 10 languages at the same time. This is still possible. But again, I always say, don't start a 10 language course just because it's cool. Start it if you want to learn those languages, of course.
Yeah, wow. I'm sure there are going to be people out there listening and thinking, I want to do 10 languages.
I would be very happy to take a 10 language course as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's the procedure for that? I mean, do people pick the languages ahead of time? Do you vet which languages and control sort of, okay, what the reasons and motivations are to see if it's a
If it's a,
reasonable?
if it's at school, it's more the school that take care of that.
Uh-huh.
I say the languages I can teach, and I think it depends on what people want to learn, and I think it also depends on the part of the world. In some countries, some languages are more popular than others, or in some parts of a certain countries like this. When it's about the people who come to me to learn multiple languages, they can choose. They can say, I want to learn that and that and that and that. So of course, there is no good or wrong combination as long as they want to learn. So not because, and again, I'm not even a fan of, so I don't think it's possible when people come to me and say, yeah, I can study 4 hours a day. Yeah, maybe one of them is true, but so one of them is right, but I really think it's not something sustainable for the whole life. And maybe if you have a goal, I want to move to a certain country and speak 4 languages, is possible. But otherwise, I prefer doable things, so that you know that it doesn't matter if you go, I don't want to say slower, because but the important thing is to go forward. No, this is at least my thing. So when I started learning piano, 2 years ago, I started 5 minutes a day, because if you think, okay, I have to study 4 hours today on Sundays, is very scary. No, so if you start doing 5 minutes, if you enjoy it, you do it for 15 minutes, even longer, but you don't feel that you're missing something, or you don't feel that, I don't know, you're wrong, or you did something wrong because you didn't dedicate 2 hours as you promised. So I prefer, for example, when I give homework or something fun, something super practical, and above all, something that you don't need 2 hours for it.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me as well. I mean, setting reasonable goals and having reasonable ideas of what you can actually do physically and mentally within the time that you've got, and how much time you can actually really put in, and
Yeah.
being realistic with that is super.
Just wanted to, yeah, exactly. And what is striking is that most people are convinced that they're waiting for the right moment to start learning the language they always wanted to learn, because they think that they need a lot of time to do that. But even if you just think about studying for 15 minutes every day, which is totally doable, then if you calculate 15 minutes, then for let's say for 2 months,
Yeah.
then you would already be studying 900 minutes, which is not bad for 2 months. So this is why it's very important that you keep in mind, you don't need to start very big. You can start with something very small, and you will progress. If you do it every day, there is no way you're not going to make any progress. This is the nice thing about languages.
It's a really nice thing. I like your idea. You know, you do, if you're doing something every single day, then it's going to have some. It's going to build, isn't it? For you personally, do you actually have any languages that you're learning now yourself?
Of
New
course, I
language?
always do. I always do. I'm still improving my Greek. I like it a lot. I must say, which is very funny to my eyes, is like I found the Greek more harder than Russian. Russian for me was not that hard. Of course, it was hard because I always say there are more exceptions than rules in Russian. But Greek, I don't know. Somehow I struggled more, but not struggle in the sense that I cannot go forward. But I think the most difficult part was finding nice material for it, because I would always find only things for tourists, and always the same things, always A1, and then 9 things. It was harder to find, at least the way I want to learn languages. So I don't like, for example, I really don't like books that are made in a way like hotel, market, clothes, color, something like that. It's really not my style of learning, because I want to start with something that is useful, that I can use to people. I cannot go to Richard and say, look, I'm learning Macedonian, and I start saying 1, 2, 3, the alphabet, or I mean, after a couple, the first time Richard might be smiling, but the second time he will already maybe run away. No, joking. You're so kind, you wouldn't do that. But I mean, especially if it's a language that people, yeah, yeah, so it's nicer to I learn languages because I want to talk to people, because I want to know them better, because I think that when a person is using a certain word in their mother tongue has more meaning, I can understand more the way this person think, and I can connect more to a deeper level. And this is why I'm also interested in languages, because I'm interested in the way people think, and I think there are so many cultures in the world, and I want to take the best of each culture, and is what I want. There is no real way to live, just just a combination of these different mentalities.
Yeah, a little bit every day. Timothy says he really liked that quote from you. There's no way you're not going to learn something if you do it every day. So yeah, it's very nice. It's a nice quote. I'm sure that will be on Twitter very soon. When you're choosing your language, because you said Greek, how did you choose Greek, and how do you choose languages generally?
I always choose languages because I meet someone who is nice and think, okay, it would be nice to speak that language. It always relate to people. I never learned a language just because it was useful. Of course, and in my experience, when I was at school and then I went to the university, people would say, "Oh no, it's better you study that language, not that one, because otherwise, as I studied translation, interpreting. So, and they would say, this combination is better. There is no better or worse. What really exists, it's like whatever you like and whatever you want to be doing all your life. And this is why how I pick them. Really, for example, Hungarian. I met nice people in Germany, and I decided to learn some Hungarian. And then I thought, but it's a very nice language. I like the grammar. It looks very complicated, so I am interested. I like challenges. So I decided, okay, I want to study a bit more. And then, for example, now what would motivate me to study more Hungarian is the fact that if you go to Hungary now, you can still try to talk to people without people changing the language all the time, which is very rare. I find nowadays in many parts of the world. Yeah, so mainly a connection to people. And I know that I don't have to know that language very well in order to connect with a friend that I just met, but it's more like it's a connection, it's curiosity, it's something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're a very communicative person, and always extremely pleasant to be around. So I can imagine that as soon as you speak to people, I know just like me, they'll open up to you and want to talk to you and want to be around you. So, you learning their language is an extra motivation as well. And I think, like you say, sometimes it does get a bit rarer to get to practice certain languages in certain places. The entry level to, I think this is the thing, the entry level to start speaking is higher. So like a language like Dutch, you have to speak Dutch pretty well in the Netherlands to be able to have them accept you as you're speaking Dutch and I'm going to speak Dutch back to you. Whereas I think you're right, in Hungary or in Poland as well, still the level is quite low. I think even with an A1, A2 level, you can start talking and people are going to be relieved. Not everywhere, not the center of Budapest or the center of Warsaw, maybe, where there are lots of tourists, but in quite a lot of the country, you're going to find a number of people who will be actually very relieved that you can say things to be able to speak.
Or that they are curious about why you learned the language, whereas I think it never happens with English anymore. It's not, why are you learning English? I don't think you ask that question anymore.
Yeah, I can't imagine somebody asking that, actually. It's funny you mentioned that, because now I don't think people would say, oh, English, that's a funny choice of why on earth would you choose English? I mean, barely anyone speaks it. It's not going to happen, is it? The people do ask it for certain languages. It is a question that people ask, why study the language? I mean, you mentioned Hungarian and Greek, which are not the most commonly studied languages. In fact, it's funny you mentioned Hungarian, because the very first polyglot conference took place.
I know.
And one of the reasons why I thought it was particularly funny to have it in Budapest is because I don't think any of the people in the language learning community were actually studying Hungarian or spoke it particularly well, if they did. And so there was kind of an irony of taking the polyglot conference to a country where very few of these multilingual and interested in every single language on the planet didn't really speak the local language. So there's almost an irony to it. But we did have locals that came and spoke it. Of course, we had other people that did come. And there were some that spoke it, but it wasn't that common. Now, more people are studying Hungarian. I mean, Lindy, there's Luca, is studying Hungarian. You. What is it with Hungarian? What am I missing out on? I did the Pimsleur challenge many years ago, but that was about as far as it went.
Maybe we can have the polyglot conference sometime in the future in Hungary again.
Back to Hungary. Would you like to go back somewhere? Is there a conference venue that you'd like to go back to?
Oh, I loved all of them, and I loved Thessaloniki. Of course, now it's and I think it's let me think. I think I didn't speak any Greek at the time, so I started maybe with the polyglot conference. I'm not really sure, but I think so. And yeah, so I loved all of them. I loved the time in Iceland, was very nice. The only reason why maybe I wouldn't go back to Iceland was just because it's super expensive. When I flew back to the UK after Iceland, I thought, pretty cheap.
Yeah, if you arrive in London and you say, oh, it's cheap here, you know there's a problem, right? I love it. But I like that you've got this motivation to learn languages that typically weren't studied by by many people. But it's interesting you mentioned the human connection. I think that is one thing that is a thing for many of us in the language learning community. Is that you meet somebody, intrigues you, the motivation, you're drawn to it. How do you stand on languages that sort of maybe you don't have access to in the same way? Have you ever been drawn to languages, particularly with this being the decade of Indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages? My thoughts are kind of there, and going to Cholula in just a few weeks. Have any of those languages ever appealed to you?
The most interesting thing I've heard, and I would have jumped into the project straight away. I met someone who was doing a PhD in the Netherlands, and he would go to I can't remember now where exactly, but in Latin America, and he would go there to talk to the last speakers of a language in order to find a way to write a grammar for it. Something like that would be amazing for me, would be super nice, and would be super motivating to learn such a language. The only reason why I haven't learned any language that is really not accessible is really just because I wouldn't be able to speak it with anyone. So, but if I even met just one speaker where I live, then I would be motivated to learn it. So it's not, I don't need like millions of people speaking it. I just need one nice person. Yeah.
Let's see if we can find some nice people. Anyone wants to reach out to us and get her interested in endangered, vulnerable, or Indigenous language, then let's see if we can get her to learn a few of those.
With pleasure.
Maybe 10 at once. What do you think? It's possible. 10 Indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages to add to your repertoire. I think that would be quite special. But seriously, I half joke and I'm half serious, but when it comes to languages like that, or even languages that have fewer materials or don't have as much on offer for you to practice, how does your learning differ? And what do you do to sort of compensate, for example, with materials?
Yeah, there is a huge difference. There is very nice material for the most common studied languages. I don't know, I would love to jump into many English books, French books, German books. There are so many nice Italian books. There are so many nice books, and I love studying with books. I like apps or other things, but I don't think it's possible, at least nowadays, to learn the language only through an app. So it can be something that you can study on those days where you don't only have 5 minutes, then you study the language. But I met some people who would say, I've been studying this language for 5 minutes every day with a certain app, and then I would say, but I cannot speak it. No wonder. I mean, I always say, I know that I changed my answers, but my mind went there. So sorry. I'm so sorry for those people, because they feel a bit, of course, disappointed, demotivated, because they don't see results. And as adults, the most motivating things is seeing results. Maybe as a kid you think, okay, I'll do it. For example, I studied piano when I was a kid, but only on my own. So I never really learned to read the notes or to play apart from one song. But I think I played it for more than on Sundays, even 4 hours in a row for years, even though I couldn't play anything, and it was still fun. And but nowadays adults, they know they have limited time, so they want to focus on something that make them progress, so that they can see results. Otherwise, why spending time on certain thing? So just to anyone who is demotivated studying only with an app, remember that if your aim is speaking, do something that helps you speak, and then all the rest on the side is also fine. Language is a system, so anything you study will come handy at some point. But if your aim is speaking, you only read, of course you will struggle with speaking. So try to mix skills, language skills, so that you can go in the direction you want. So sorry, I go back to your question. Can you remind it to me? Just
So, what do you do if you don't have, for example, materials in certain
okay.
languages? The
I
balancing
normally
of that.
I try to create my own material, because for example, for Greek, what I've done was to look for different books, and I never found one book that was perfect. So what I did, I tried to. One book was good for grammar, but the examples, the words that were in there were really boring. The words that I wouldn't be able to use. Then I skip everything that is not useful to me in this very moment. A web page, then they have a topic I really not interested in, then I just look if there are sequences, like if there are levels, then I just study the grammar of it, but not the words, and then I move on. Because for languages that are not they don't have some good material, I don't want to be studying for 1 month something that it just puts me off. So this is what I'm doing for material. And if I were studying a language where there wouldn't even be a book, or really not so much, of course I would try to see if there is a material in another language, which I always do. I rarely study in Italian, but I think I learn a lot also through listening. So I try to look for material. But for example, some years ago, I started studying Sinhala, and it was super hard to find material, super hard. I went there, I stayed there for 1 month, and I started to understand how the language worked, and I could start understanding words, even though no one taught me Sinhala. But I wanted to study more, and at the time it was super difficult, almost impossible to find nice material. I found like one book, but without audio. Can you imagine? I mean, it seemed very nice, but I wouldn't be able to. And then I know that I have Sri Lankan friends, and they try to teach me something, but in the way they thought it was like nice to speak for a foreigner, but then they wouldn't use the same words themselves. So it's very hard. What I would try would be This is why maybe I love learning language if I'm connected to it as well. So for example, if there was a friend, I am learning Greek, and a very good friend of mine, she's from Cyprus. Okay, she speaks her own language plus Greek, and I don't bother her with 1,000 questions. But when I really have a doubt, when we talk, then I might ask her one question. And in this way, at least I can understand something that is not explained anywhere, but not grammar, because again, if you're a native speaker, it's very, it doesn't happen very often that you are able to explain the grammar rule, but at least how to use a certain word. Because when you see a word but without context, you have a list, you don't know how to use it. Or maybe for someone who's never studied Greek, I think for me, the most striking thing was that I knew that I would need, when I learn a language, I need a future, I need past, this is what I need the most, and then present if I want to talk about my routine. But then in Greek was super funny, because I would need a subjunctive from the very beginning. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk about something that I like, but not regularly, like something I want to do in a bit. So this is why.
Yeah, it is different. The different needs for different languages are quite striking. I mean, you've mentioned a few things during this conversation about learning things that are tangible and realistic for you, things that you need, things that you're realistically going to use, focusing on those in the first place. And that's absolutely where I come from as well when it comes to this type of thing. And learning a lot of the grammar in context. I think I think these are things that we share in and have in common with languages and language learning. There are some interesting points that you made about learning certain languages, though, that I want to kind of pick up on, and that is particularly with languages that are not commonly taught as a second language. You mentioned Sinhala, and the example you gave was people not telling you the words that they actually use. And then also native speakers not actually knowing their own grammar. Yeah, this is both of these statements I've experienced myself firsthand. And I don't know if anybody is listening can identify with this, but how do we potentially deal with this idea? Because people say they want to learn a language, and then you sound like a book, but then you want to sound more like people speak. Is there a benefit to, first of all, sounding like a book and then sounding like people speak?
I had Arabic at university, and I studied like classical Arabic, and I thought at the time, long time ago, I thought it was learning Arabic, but actually no one speaks like that. And when I was trying to speak with people, they would almost be, because I sounded like a book. So I would, of course, okay, in the case of Arabic, I think there is only one good thing. First of all, the good material is mostly in classical Arabic, but this is not really a good reason to me, because if then I cannot use it, I'm learning something that is even more complicated, because you need to learn the endings, the cases, and the people don't use them in their dialects. So then there is no need in learning them at the very beginning, at least. The only reason why the reason why I study classical Arabic is because when you study interpreting, you need to be able to translate for the United Nations and so on. So of course you will need it's the language of the administration. But after that, I studied Egyptian Arabic and Syrian Arabic, Levantine Arabic. So I was super happy about that. At least I could relate more to people. But about your question, when you see this time I remember that, and I want to go back to your question. What I would do is, if you know anyone speaking the language, and this maybe is the reason why you're learning it, I would try to find a way, either with a language exchange or to to meet and ask for a couple of words, couple of sentences every week, so that you can learn the actual, the real one. Again, don't unless they teach the language, don't expect them to tell you the grammar rule. Otherwise, maybe you will be. I've heard some people explaining rules that don't exist because they try to think. They think, okay, it's not possible. I need to give I need to give a reason. Then they come up with explanations that, of course, they cannot know. If they're their own native language. So don't ask for grammar rules, but look for, unless they're teachers, but look for patterns. Or, for example, what I do is when I learned German, I had a super nice friend who helped me, but I asked him, okay, how do you say that? And then I would say, can I also use it in this sentence? Okay, it was super patient, it's super nice. Okay, so don't annoy people all the time with such questions. But if you have a friend who is or maybe a language, a language partner, or maybe a teacher, up to you. I always ask, can I also use it in this context? Because I know that in the other languages, I can also use it in this context. So you understand when you can use it and when not. I don't know. I think anyone who studied Japanese can relate to that. Even if you translate word by word, it will never be whatever you wanted to say, or you will never get to the right expression if you don't actually know it. So it's yeah. I think learning language in context, and that can be vocabulary or grammar. So in context, I mean talking to people, trying to use it, and try to pick up how people use it, even through a video. You will not understand 90% of it, but if they use the word, at least you know which way it was used in which context.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to go to the second one first, just because it follows on nicely to what we've just been discussing. And from Eduardo, he agreed with about sounding like a book and sounding weird or like Shakespeare. But his question actually is, when you were talking about finding resources for Sinhalese, he has the same problem with Kazakh. And he'd love to learn ways on how to come across real language resources. Have you got anything you'd like to share on that with him?
In this case, I suppose that if Eduardo wants to learn Kazakh, is maybe he has met someone from there, and this is the first thing. Second, with languages, I don't have any material. I would even start listening to YouTube videos or podcasts, even if I don't understand anything. Of course, at the beginning will be very frustrating, but doesn't really matter because it will not be like this forever. It's like if you listen to, I always suggest at least try to find a topic you know very well. Let's say that you know about cooking, you know about a certain work environment, then try to find something at least in that context, because even if you don't understand anything, you will pick up some words just because you understand the context and you know the field, and you will be able to say some words in a field you're interested in. It's not as if you were learning useless words from a random word list. So if there is no much information about a certain language that you can really have access to, so what I would do, I would try to find again someone who can help you with that, and up to you, or how lucky you are if you can find a language partner, a language teacher, or even someone who is learning the language like you. Many people are afraid of language partners who are learning the same language as you, but actually you will not pick up all the mistakes the other person is making. I wish I could listen to Richard and speak like Richard just because I'm talking to Richard. But you even doesn't matter whether people make mistakes or not. We will not be able to. We're not sponges, and we are not able to pick up mistakes so easily. Only if the person repeats it all over the time. So even if you have a language partner, you can try to maybe this person understand one thing better than you do, and vice versa. So I would either find someone, either a language partner or language teacher, or someone who is learning the language like you, for sure. At least you can help each other, keep motivated. Maybe someone found a resource, maybe you found it. I think it's already good. Then I would always listen to the language, because even if you don't understand it, it will still help you yeah, maybe Richard will laugh. When I didn't know any English, maybe my English, I never had English at school. I went to the UK and I studied and I studied on my own 1 hour every day. And what I did was I wanted to learn to read The Lord of the Ring, and I didn't understand much. I bought it, the 3 books, and I started reading every day just a bit, like 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Maybe the first month I read one line in 10 minutes. But in
Wow.
9 months, I finished the 3 books. So what happens is that if you keep doing it, even if at the beginning you don't understand much, it's still better than nothing. Because if you really want to learn Kazakh, you have to even if there is a wall, you have to find the ways to go across it, climb it, go like this. So anything, it will make sense in the end. So don't get discouraged. And The more you study it, the more you're in contact with people who studied it or native speakers, the more you will find material for that. That's for sure. So don't give up if you like.
Yeah, thank you for that. There is one comment there that I think I've got time to read out, but
Mm-hmm.
and you can give some short thoughts on it, and then we'll have to wrap up, unfortunately, because we've got to the hour. Ivan and Caitlin say, a couple of years ago, I was trying to study 2 languages at the same time. It was a huge disappointment. In a half a year, I recognized that I could read and comprehend about A2 in one of the languages. However, was not able to use anything in even simple conversations. I had a strong feeling of 2 languages eating and beating each other in my mind. Now, I'm just going to say before Elisa says anything, sounds like you needed the guidance of a really good Italian language professional to help you get through that. But now, all joking aside, would you like to just comment on that briefly?
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with you. So you can do it on your own, but if you see that there is something, learning 2 languages that are very similar is completely possible, but it must be done in a way that your brain understands how to keep them separate and how to use them. So the best way to not to mix languages up is to use them. If you only study and you don't apply that to a conversation, it's super hard to keep. This is why it's very nice to have guidance, because in the same lesson many people come to me because they don't want to forget the previous ones and they want to improve other ones, and they can speak in the same hour 4 different languages, for example. And I'm not saying this is the only way, but of course it will help greatly if you notice that you have some problem. But again, you don't even need lessons forever. Even if you just go to a valid, a good multilingual teacher and study those through 2 or 3 languages. So in my case, again, after 2, 3 lessons, people never mix languages up. So if they want, they can just study on their own, keep studying on their own. It's not forever. It's just until we can find a way so that you will not mix them up. So
Yeah.
it's totally possible. I think when I hear stories like that, I know that it's really just about the method, and I totally understand the frustration. But for example, when I started studying Portuguese, I would think in Catalan all the time. But why? Because I wasn't really studying all of them, both of them at the same time. When I started studying and a bit comparing, it went away, and I never do that. I never did that again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Nice to end on a positive note on how it is possible to do what you do, and that there is hope there for that. It just needs the right guidance. And I think that, this is something that's been highlighted to me over the last couple of years during COVID, where I've spoken to lots of people too. And it's a case of finding the right way for you. And this is where the guidance, I think, that you mentioned is really valuable. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us, for your time, for your expertise, for sharing your experience and your knowledge. Um, just always a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure.
So,
Thank you very much. It's a topic I really enjoy, and if anyone wants to write to me, I would be happy to answer the questions. Yeah.
yeah,
So
feel free to hook up on social media. You can reach out to Lisa on social media. We'll put the links to her social media accounts in the description of this video so that you can find her as easily as possible. And
if you can just type my name, my full name, you will definitely find a way to keep in contact.
Very famous lady, so I mean.
No, I mean maybe there are not so many people who. No.
If you put Elisa Polese in languages, you're gonna find you are. Of course you are. Of course you are.
It's true, but not is true. Like I mean, you can find me easily. Doesn't mean that.
You're Googleable. You're Googleable.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
You're very Googleable. Exactly. Yeah. So you can Google Elisa and find it that way. But I will also put the links at the bottom as well so that you can find them. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, everyone who was here, and thank you for the questions. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for organizing this amazing event, and yeah, thank you very much for being here.